Welcome to another episode of Return on Character podcast with Dan Cooper, me, your host, founder and CEO of Rock Investments, where we allocate capital into the public markets based on the character of the public company CEOs. I'm honored to have with us today a dear friend, a mentor, someone that I look up to more than most in the world that I've had the privilege of knowing. Tom is kind of one of my heroes. He's also been kind enough to be a board member to Rock Investments. But Tom Darden with us today. Please say hello, Tom.
Dan, great to see you.
It's so wonderful to have you. That I get to have you all to myself. That I get
it's to my benefit.
Abuse you. Yeah, I get to abuse you for the things I want to know more, and honestly, the things that I know that you are that I think are really genuinely important to share with the world. And so, thanks for coming on. Thanks for giving us your time. As I said, Tom is actually, I have to say, Tom was the reason we launched Return on Character.
I'm sure that's
Investments.
Not true.
No, it is, because we were having a conversation, and you said, "Geez, that's something I'd be interested in being a part of." And it was the seed that needed to be planted to be able to grow the tree that we now get to look at and benefit from. So,
it warms my heart. I mean, notwithstanding the fact I don't necessarily believe it, but anyway, you're very kind to say that. And anyway, any little thing I can do to cheer you on or support you, I want to do.
Tom, Tom is the CEO and founder of a $2.5 billion fund called Cherokee. And Cherokee is very unique in itself, but I was hoping what you could do for us to start off is, how did Cherokee come to be? In other words, it grew to be something really interesting, and it morphed over time. But take us back to your early days when you first started, and how you ended up with Cherokee?
Well, I was working at Bain & Company, and I had an opportunity to buy some brick manufacturing businesses. And I had a plan. This was at a time when energy costs were very high. And I had a plan to convert them to using alternative energy, specifically in that case, biomass. It was not an original idea. Other people were doing it. In fact, people had done it since the beginning of time, burning wood or, burning later on tires. I mean, almost anything in order to heat up the clay that would melt into the shape of a brick. So, there were more advanced ways of doing it. And I was an environmental guy from an education standpoint, and sort of in terms of what I was interested in. And I knew that EPA was beginning to regulate wood waste or sawdust. And the sawmills, which were prevalent in our area, were having to dump it in landfills. And so that was stupid from a carbon standpoint, from a CO2 standpoint, or methane. And I thought, well, it's much better environmentally to burn it than it is to degrade it, to allow it to decompose into methane. And meanwhile, natural gas costs a lot. So there's a great arbitrage opportunity to convert these manufacturing plants. So I started doing that, and the plants were...
Tom, how old were you when you kind of first realized that this conversion?
Well, wait a minute. I mean, I was thinking about this when I was in graduate school, or in university, graduate school. This is kind of part of my... I was obsessed with this subject, broadly speaking, from a very, very young age, 20 or maybe younger, and was obsessed with environmental issues and alternative energy and finding environmentally better ways of making things, doing things, since I was in middle school. I'm not kidding. I mean, it just was something I came to be really interested in, almost from an alchemy standpoint, or from a, waste equals food. I mean, the idea that waste is only something that's in the wrong place. Like, there's no form of waste that is useless.
Yeah.
It's just in the wrong place or in the wrong concentration. And so if you could gather together that waste, you could becomes an ingredient. It becomes a food. It becomes, something that's positive. And of course, it is food for bacteria. And bacteria are one of the great ways of converting this stuff. And so that was a big focus of mine as well.
So you're at Bain and Company, and then you see this opportunity with the brick companies.
Yeah.
What was it scary when you decided to jump from Bain and try to do this?
Well, it never dawned on me, or it didn't bother me in the least. I wasn't the least bit worried about that. But I think it's an attribute of youth. And I had a law degree. I could get a job working as or I'd go back to Bain or whatever. It was not, I didn't feel like it was really desperate. I felt like I had a lot of capital in effect in the form of a work track record and a educational track record, meaning I didn't have any money, but I had, an asset there, which was downside protection. So I really sort of had nothing to lose, was the way I saw it. It was frightening in terms of a responsibility standpoint. I was very worried about that. And, I would have been, well, the whole thing was probably going to blow up anyway. I mean, the company was in a terrible, these companies, I bought 4 simultaneously, but they were in terrible shape. And what their future was uncertain. 3 of them were in terrible shape. And so I don't know, it was kind of like it was a crashing plane, and well, you might as well jump in it and try to see if you could pull it out.
Pull it out of the dive.
So anyway, that was not too much to lose.
So you're a 28-year-old kid that gets 4 brick companies. Had you ever led an organization before? Had you ever led people before?
No, I had
what was that like?
No experience. I'd been to law school. I worked in Korea for a year for the Korea Institute of Science and Technology, doing kind of urban environmental planning work. Came back, went to law school, and then I went to Bain. And Bain it was such a great experience. I woke up every day thinking I was the luckiest person on the planet that they gave me a job. Coming out of law school, particularly with no relevant track in the background, I didn't major in business. I majored in anthropology, and I had a master's, not completed, but part of a master's in city planning, urban planning, environmental planning. So I was woefully under-equipped at Bain. They took a chance on me and gave me a job. I was so I am eternally grateful. But you work at those consulting firms, you don't get a management, expertise or skills. I mean, you're just a doer. You're doing work. So no, I was woefully under-equipped in that regard. But
well, tell us a little bit about it. I mean, what was it like? I mean,
I went in
first of all, a crisis situation is always a difficult time to manage. You have to make tough decisions.
Oh, it's easy.
It's easy.
It's much easier to manage in a crisis. Because every decision is, that you cannot keep doing what you're doing. And so it's kind of like the base case is any change you make would make it better. I understand that's not necessarily the case. It could be that some changes would make it worse, but you don't have the burden of the stasis, of the status quo. That's a real burden for companies. I think systematically things are going okay, or it's the frog in the pot where it's getting a little warmer, but people, it's hard to jump, man. When the wheels are falling off or the wings are falling off or whatever, it's easy to make decisions. So in that sense, it was really great. And I'm sure that we made wrong decisions, but almost everything, just doing anything would make it better. I went into it very humble, from a personal standpoint. I knew what I didn't know, and I was very honest about that with people. And I said, basically, I'm coming here from a consulting firm. I have one plan, one idea, which is we're going to convert these plants to using sawdust, and the economics of that are compelling. And people were on board with that, broadly speaking. But in terms of the overall management of the business, or especially areas of the business like sales and marketing, or accounting and finance, I didn't know, that they were just. I was actually very interested in accounting and finance, but it was not. I just said, whatever you're doing, just keep doing. Good luck, or let me know, or anything I can do to be helpful, let me know. But I'm going to be in those manufacturing plants with a cutting torch in my hand. Or, I could be working on trying to figure out how to make this conversion and how to implement that. and how to fund that. And that's really what we have to do. So in that sense, it was easy. So I just walked around. I spent time, a few days in every department in the manufacturing plants, just talking to people. And I think it came to be pretty clear to them that I was open-minded and that I wasn't coming in with a bunch of opinions. I was coming in asking questions and trying to help. And so people really jumped in and were very, very, it was just a great kind of a culture atmosphere of people just trying to be helpful, contributing ideas and helping us solve problems.
Were there any ideas that kind of stands out that you received from the folks in the plant that kind of blew your mind that hadn't happened yet, but
there's one that really stands out because it was interestingly mundane, and but the whole setting of it, I mean, just kind of the way it came about and the way this person thought about it. I would meet with different groups with each kind of department of the big plants, and we had 1,000 employees day one, or maybe 800 employees day one, and so it was a big operation, and I would have meetings of a team in different areas of the plant, and one of them pertained to the part where you process the clay. So you bring in clay, and it's kind of in the form of big rocks for the most part. You have to grind those rocks up and screen it. You get it down to the right size and right characteristics, and then you store it so you have some backup clay in case there's a equipment malfunction or something. And so you have these giant buildings. I mean, a building that's half as long as a football field, let's say, filled with clay and conveyor belts and equipment. And so this guy was there in a meeting, and he said, "Well, I've got an idea. I've always wondered why his job was to run a front end loader, giant, piece of Caterpillar equipment, cost $250,000. And to scoop up clay out of this big pile, a conveyor belt was dropping the clay from where it was processed into this pile in this giant building and put it in a hopper or a bin right over there. And these distances were not that far. And he said, "I don't understand why we do that. Like, why does he do what he does, right?" He said, "Why don't we just extend the conveyor belt a little bit so the clay drops into the hopper instead of using a $250,000 piece of equipment and himself to pick it up and move it into the hopper." And it was just this, the simplicity, the obviousness, but also the selflessness of this guy sort of saying, I don't know that I could even say having the trust that he wouldn't be fired as a function of that. Well, why would he have the trust? He had no, he didn't know any, it's all new and changing. And this guy did it. I just saw what an incredible, I don't know, like statement of character, if you will. It's coincidentally, we were trying to figure out how to pay for a front end loader just like that we needed elsewhere in the operation. And so all of a sudden it freed up this, $250,000 that for darn sure we didn't have. Anyway, it's just this incredibly moving, kind of emotionally moving thing where this guy stuck his neck out for the benefit of this larger organization, but also the wonderful simplicity of just a simple idea and the effect that it could have. We tend to think that things are so complex, and yet often something really, really small can make such a big difference.
Yeah. So did it work?
Yeah, it worked. It worked. The natural gas was 40% of the cost of making a brick, and once we converted to sawdust, the total energy cost was 10% of the cost of making a brick, and the cost was lower, so it was probably 8 or 9% compared to the 40. So you pick up 30 percentage points in your cost or in your margin. That was 100% of the margin, by the way, because we had no margin before. These companies were losing $3 million a year on about $25 million in revenues. And so, it was just a sinking ship, and that turned it around and it became successful. We had you asked how we got started at least at Cherokee as it evolved into, we had contamination at all of these plants. These plants were 75 years old or older. And we had, at one point, we owned over 100 underground storage tanks at various places at the different plants. and they all were leaking fundamentally, and EPA was regulating that. And we didn't have the money to clean it up, and I knew about bacteria cleanup contamination, or consuming different types of almost anything. Really, bacteria will consume almost anything. And I thought, well, maybe we could use bacteria. And I got some professors at Virginia Tech, and we developed bacteria for clean up contaminated soil. And we used it to clean up our own contaminated soil. But then, it was pretty obvious that there could be other people interested in that. And so that turned into a business of growing and selling bacteria to other people doing bioremediation. And then that turned into a business of us taking in contaminated dirt into warehouses that we would locate in different places around the country, or to sites that we had already in the brick operation, and treating it with the bacteria, cleaning it up, and the bacteria would consume the petroleum contamination in the soil. And so from there, it was an easy shot to get into the business of buying contaminated land. We could buy contaminated land, use our background knowledge, insurance, kind of ideas about risk management to buy contaminated land, and that turned into a big business. And that's what we raised the funds for, the $2+ billion that you mentioned, that we raised over about a 25-year period. And we have just sold the last last contaminated property that we owned. We wanted to exit before, what was obviously going to be a recession. I suspect we've entered into that recession. But anyway, so we did. We sold the last of the property that was in our private equity investment funds. Separately, I've been buying land around Raleigh, outside Raleigh, some of which is brownfield sites, for a long time. And so at this point, the ongoing Cherokee land activity, property activity is mostly focused around that.
Tom, what was it like for you? I mean, what was the environment around the plant, and how were you received? And whenever it was clear that things started to turn in the right direction, I mean, eventually it started to work. I mean, that must have been kind of a special experience.
Yeah, it was the greatest. It was the greatest work experience of my life. Sadly, you don't know what to value at what time, but because it was teamwork, and I'd always been an athlete in school and been on teams, and I probably wasn't the most rah-rah kind of a guy, and in a weird way, I didn't really like sports all that much. I just played them, but I think the camaraderie of a group of people working together toward a common goal is so motivating, so moving, and you really, really have that in a manufacturing plant. I just think it's a special place. Probably any manufacturing plant would be that way, and so it's very much that way. It was, I was always an outsider in a way because of my background and also the other stuff I worked on. I was having to deal with finance and other stuff. So, I'd be in the plants for 4 hours and then leave and go off and do whatever else I had to do in the company. So, yeah, you're never really part of the team in a way, but it was just such a special, wonderful time. And if I knew now what I knew then, what I didn't know then, if I knew then what I know now, then who knows? I probably would have tried to stay in that role, if you will, as a work career.
Yeah.
As opposed to like the world, a more cerebral world or a more financial world, or that stuff by comparison is quite, much less meaningful.
Right. Well, one of the things that I think is really interesting about you and your story is how you approached becoming wealthy, and how you reacted to that. Would you mind sharing a little bit of that?
Mostly with astonishment.
Yeah. How did you develop your philosophy around how to handle that?
In some ways,
why was it?
In some ways,
yeah.
like being in the brick plants, I always felt like a stranger to it, and I definitely felt like a stranger to the world of being rich. I had a deep aversion to wealth from childhood. It's a strange thing. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's a good question. So I grew up I had the most privileged upbringing of anyone I know. I mean, I just had a completely privileged childhood. My mom was a small town school teacher. She didn't work when I was young, but she'd been a teacher before, and then she later went back to work.
Tom, your microphone's hitting your collar there a little bit, so if you could just keep it
Hold it
forward.
out. Is that better? Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, my mom was a small town school teacher. She didn't work when we were young, but she worked before that, and then later she went back to work as a teacher. And my dad was a small town lawyer. He actually was in business before, but then when I was in high school, he quit work and he went to law school at UNC at Chapel Hill. So the family moved to Chapel Hill, and so then he became a small town lawyer. And I'd say in an average year, my mother probably made more money as a public school teacher in a tiny county in eastern North Carolina than my father made as a lawyer. In other words, these people were not well-to-do. And so when I say I had a privileged upbringing, it was by no means because of wealth. And they didn't have any feelings one way or another about wealth. I mean, I don't think they cared. I mean, they weren't averse to it. They weren't, communists, let's say. I was a communist as a kid, but I saw the trappings of wealth, and I found it to be so offensive or annoying or something. There was a guy who lived in the town, one town that we lived in as a kid. I moved a lot when I was a kid, as my dad would move with his job. And we lived in a place, and somebody was a big supporter of UNC, the local university in North Carolina. And the color of the school is baby blue. Okay. That's the school color. They deem it Carolina blue, but in any event, he bought a new Rolls Royce. And of course somebody had a Rolls Royce in High Point, North Carolina. It was just ridiculous. He bought a Rolls Royce and he painted it baby blue. He painted his Rolls Royce Carolina blue, and he would drive it to the football games and park it in the parking lot. And it was this sort of plumage, like wearing the vestiges of wealth, vestiges. Anyway, kind of demonstrating his. And I just found it so. It just drove me crazy to see that kind of behavior. And I said, as a young person, I said, that will never be me. I cannot do that. I mean, it'll just drive me. It's worse than distasteful. To me, it kind of crossed a line into wrong, and I can't really define that. Why I say that, but I really had a strong aversion to it. So, by the same token, I had this great background or education, or I knew I could kind of do what I wanted to do, and I wasn't worried about money. I wasn't worried about whether I'd have enough to feed my family. So when I ended up having what by today's standards would be a very small amount of money, but just a ridiculous amount to me, meant I really would not have needed to work again in my life, and I was 30 or something. I was like an anthropologist relative to that. I was an observer of this situation. Like, this is really strange. I concealed it completely, and no one knew. And I didn't change my behavior. I did 3 stupid things. I allowed myself 3 stupid things. One was not stupid, 2 were not stupid. I bought my wife the first new car that we had ever owned. And that was one. And the other is we were building a house.
Was it a Rolls Royce?
No, it was not. It was not. It was not. But it did cost $30,000, which is a lot of money. For another $30,000, we were in the process of building a house, and I added a wing onto it, a 1-bedroom, little thing sticking off the side of it, so that we could have a guest room in the house, like a first floor guest room. And that cost $30,000 to add to the house that was under construction. And I bought myself a briefcase, a leather briefcase that cost $300. And at that point, I said, "Okay, I'm done. I've had my midlife crisis or lost my mind." So anyway, I tried hard not to change kind of standard of living. I've complied with that to various failing degrees over the years. But in any event, I just didn't feel like it was mine. I felt like it belonged to society, or I didn't feel a proprietary interest. I didn't feel like certainly didn't feel like I deserved it, or and I'm not saying did not work hard. I just thought, I'm a lucky person, and why did this happen? This thing fell on my head. So I had a real sense of kind of responsibility or stewardship responsibility. Like, this is not mine. I need to use this for the benefit of society. And that led to, I was very focused on entrepreneurship and corporate startup culture and providing jobs. And so I kind of made a promise to myself that I would only do that with any money that I had. And as a function of that, I've stayed out of public markets ever since. And when I say stayed out, I mean really, really, really stayed out. I don't have any stocks, bonds, mutual funds, any traded investments whatsoever, except for rock, I must say, which is in my 401k. My 401k is my one exception. And so I just said, I want to be an active investor. I want to create jobs. I want to build technologies, build companies. And that's what I should do with my capital. And so that's what I've done for the last 100 years approximately. It's been interesting because I've completely missed the entire run up in the stock market. The stock market just exploded over that 30-year period. And I've completely missed it and kind of waved at it over there like, oh, hey, good luck, guys.
But, and I may have that wrong a little bit, but your philosophy of money in the bank, for example, as a point of security.
Yeah, no,
do you keep a big giant chunk of money sitting in the bank so that you're safe, or how do you look at it that way? I mean,
I lead an illiquid life to a degree that I've never met anyone ever in any context, except maybe a young startup entrepreneur that had no money, period. I've never met anyone who was as illiquid or as illiquid as a percentage of anything, like whatever you want to measure it by, kind of the amount of liquidity versus the amount of deployed capital. So I think it's really important to stay deployed. If you think your capital makes a difference, then you should stay deployed. And you should stay deployed in something that makes a difference. And cash is an example of what doesn't make a difference. So I think you need enough cash so that you're not going to completely, run off the edge of the cliff. But aside from that, I think it's irresponsible to hold a lot of cash. It would be astonishing if I had 5% of my assets in any form that I could get my hands on in 6 months. But people say they're illiquid because they got their money tied up in public stocks that they could sell in the next, 30 seconds. But I don't want to sell it because, for some reason like taxes or whatever. I'm talking about illiquidity like does not exist. And anyway, that's just sort of what I've chosen to do.
Well, to me, but also to me, what's interesting is that there'll be times when you're like, well, I can't make that investment because I don't have liquidity for it right now.
All the time.
And as I understand it, it's a function of a value set that kind of stems from what you spoke to earlier, and that is, look, it's not mine, really. I mean, it's mine. I guess I have some power over it, but at the end of the day, there's this felt obligation to use cash to try to move the needle in the right direction.
Yeah, exactly. And so that does not allow a lot of room for decision making, based on returns, right? The decision. I mean, look, I think that in order to be effective at almost any service, product, idea, whatever, almost anything would be best done through some type of a business structure because the incentives are appropriately aligned, reasonably appropriately aligned. You can gather people together, you can gather capital together, you can get resources to implement something. So I'm a huge fan of business. I think it's the right way to do things. And you can't stay in business unless you make a profit. So I'm by no means anti-profit. I think it's critically important. But I've always found it curious that people make investment decisions solely on the basis of return, or even 90% on the basis of return. That would be the determining factor. Everything else being equal, if everything else truly were equal, I could flip I could choose between A and B, and A made more money than B, I would choose A, no question. but everything else is never equal. And how often do you see a situation, certainly if you're in the direct investing world like I am, so I see deals all the time, then constantly I'm seeing something that I think this really could be an important thing. And typically at the level that I'm getting involved, which is very early, you don't have any idea what the profitability is going to be. But I do see people who say, no, I'm only going to invest in, a certain type of medical, new drug development because regulations or support that kind of thing. And the government will pay you a lot of money if you do it. And so I'm going to make the most profit by doing that. And I'm just roll my eyes like, wow, it's just such a strange reason to run your life, if you will.
But Tom, so how many businesses do you think you've invested in since your Cherokee liquidation days?
So I never kept track of it, and I really kind of felt like it was almost inappropriate to keep track of it. It's the wrong term, but I felt like I didn't want to be following that metric, the metric of observing a portfolio, okay, which obviously that's what every investor does, is observe a portfolio. But I felt like it wasn't why I was doing it. And so I was making the decision I was making individually. They stood on their own individually, and kind of the performance of a portfolio over time was not my goal. It seemed to me, and so I didn't keep track of it. By the way, I have a full-time accountant who does keep track of this stuff, and it's all written down, but I wouldn't prepare it as kind of a portfolio analysis or do portfolio analysis on it, or different sectors, what sectors am I in and how are they doing? So over time, people would ask me, people that I interacted with who knew that this is what I was doing would say, how do you do that? Or what do you do? Or how's it work? And I started thinking that I kind of owed it to the world or to others to figure this out and try to provide information to people who might want to do the same thing. So I thought I need to gather the data together, and I, between my accountant and a financial analyst that I hired to do this, pulled together a list. I thought it might have been 75 different, companies or deals at that point. And as I pulled the database together, there were 211. And now about 50 of those I would discard because it was either me investing in a local venture fund. If somebody's starting a venture fund around here, my inclination is to give them a little bit of money to try to be helpful or be a team player. And so there might be 10 or 15 of those that were either the first or follow-on investments in local venture funds. And then some of those were real estate, and I'm not counting that in that calculation. I'm not counting our funds or any of that activity. So, it ended up being about 4 or 5 deals a year over 30 years or thereabouts. So, and I knew that I was pretty active, but I didn't know what the numbers were. At any given time, there are 40 or 50 of those that are alive. I mean, that's where the portfolio that I keep an eye on of these highly illiquid, early stage deals. Mostly environmental, energy, alternative energy, environment would be by far the leading. That would be 80% of them. And about 50 of them I started. Okay, so I had the idea. And either
50 of them?
Yeah, a big percentage.
You started.
Yeah, had the idea. And I've got patents associated with smart grid, the operation of the electric grid, for example, things that I was involved in figuring out, and all the bacteria stuff and the pollution cleanup businesses. But a lot of them, I'll have the idea and I'll find somebody or find somebody else who has the idea or whatever and say, hey, come in and I'll fund this thing. Let's build something out of this.
Right. Well, one of those companies that you invested in was Rock Investments, which allowed us to launch Return on Character ETF, the first of its kind.
That was the best one.
What? Well, yeah, right. Why were you interested in investing in a company that tries to source character in the marketplace? What pulled you in to this, and what do you think? How do you think about it as it relates to its opportunity to contribute, in the broader world?
Sure. If you view capitalism or business as being a form of stewardship, you think about society. I mean, society's capital is so critically important to how the society evolves. and the decisions being made by the people who control society's capital are so critical to how our society evolves. I mean, how our society evolves at a sociological level, as well as at a economic level, as well as at a technological level. The sociological side of that is really important. In other words, what are the behavioral attributes that get promoted by way of example via corporate America, which is most of America in terms of work, right? I mean, how many people work for a company versus don't work for a company in America? I don't know those numbers, but it's got to be the majority. So that's a huge cultural thing, kind of, like a super tanker moving through the water, having an effect. And what are the values of the people who are managing that? It's just so critically important, and particularly in America right now, because we've had a 20-year period, 30-year period where the values of the people managing so much that capital have been downright sociopathic. I mean, worse than zero. These were not people without values. These were people who affirmatively, knowingly chose to accept very bad outcomes, socially very bad outcomes, knew it was happening. So it's the equivalent of tobacco companies, or take tobacco companies. I grew up in North Carolina much of my life, and the tobacco companies have been key economic drivers, and they were around, they were around places I lived, maybe a tobacco plant or something, or people working for these companies. And of course, going to school like UNC, you would meet people whose families had been in the tobacco industry. I wouldn't speak to them. I just thought, how could you do that? My parents had some friends that were in the tobacco business, and I thought, anyway, don't get me started, but I just thought, you have a product that's killing people, it's destroying part of society, and you're doing it because you're making money? Let's have a conversation about this. So I wasn't very popular at the average cocktail party, I guess. But anyway, so now I'll take that forward. It's worse now. It's worse. And so we allowed that to happen. We, meaning America. You have a group of people who are devoid of values other than making money and pursuing their technology, whatever their technology is, their math or whatever. How could we have allowed that to happen? It just drives me crazy. So what's going to fight? What will defeat that? It can't be some regulatory regimen. The regulators are always kind of running along behind that train. It's the concept of character. That character really does matter. So I was deeply taken, deeply moved, deeply, supportive or impressed by what you were talking about, the work you did early on when you were part of, you and Joe Ritchie were, the people. I'm not saying nobody else ever thought of it, but I'm saying, you guys were building out the infrastructure to do this, the intellectual or analytical infrastructure to do this, to figure out, how do you measure character, and what's the effect of character, and what is the correlation to returns? And it just makes good intuitive sense that businesses that had good character would perform better. I'm not saying all the time, like if somebody came out with some destructive widget or something, you can make a lot of money for a while. But over a long period of time, it seems to me that character will prevail. So these are the reasons that I was so supportive. I think the social impact that you can have is enormous.
Yeah. Well, you've been a cornerstone, Tom.
A cornerstone. I'm a pebble. Not even a brick. I'm a little rock in the mortar.
You're a foundation piece. Well, one of the things I love about you the most is that you're a thinker and you think about things. And, I would love to be able to hear what you're thinking about now, what you're concerned about, what are the things that you are applying yourself today to try to, move the needle in the right direction. I mean, you've always been doing that, but what are some things that you're doing today that or thoughts that you may have on society or environment specifically?
Sure.
You've been a big advocate of the environment. What's Tom doing today? I mean, I think this is post Cherokee. Cherokee's somewhat closed up for now. And you're kind of onto your next season. The funds, yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the great things about this is not to prepare in advance. Okay, I actually think it's a really great thing because it's of the moment, let's say, and Dan, that I've been working on fusion energy for the last decade. I organized this initiative to bring together capital to pursue alternative methods of triggering a fusion reaction, alternative besides enormous temperature and pressure,
Uh-huh.
and began doing this because of evidence that this might occur or does occur, but it was not replicable, and trying to figure out, well, why is it not replicable, or are people wrong with their measurements? Can we prove that it doesn't work, or can we find that it does work, one or the other? And so I've spent 10 years and an enormous amount of time and money working on that. Increasingly, by the way, I believe that fusion will not be a productive source of energy. Of course, the news is filled with announcements of the big fusion initiatives, the ones that do use temperature and pressure. And I cheer them on, and I know a number of those people, and I hope that they're successful on the one hand. On the other hand, I cannot understand the economics of any of that relative to other alternatives that are pretty good. And I'm including like solar plus storage. I was involved in developing a solar park a dozen years ago, and I'm getting ready to redevelop it, repower it, basically replace all the panels and repower it after 12 years. And we will, the new design with new panels and new equipment will put out 6 times as much energy in the same land area as one 12 years ago. Now, this is probably an extreme example, but, call it 4 times on average, probably efficiency improvement over a dozen years. Meanwhile, storage is getting cheaper and more available. I'm not talking about lithium. You don't need lithium for grid storage. You could use all kinds of other storage systems. So storage plus solar, I think, is going to be cheaper than fusion could ever be. And meanwhile, what about fission? We've got great fission reactor opportunities. The new reactors being built. Society has a deep aversion to anything nuclear. I had a deep aversion to things nuclear. That's why I got so involved in environmental stuff. When I was in middle school, I was just passionately terrified of nuclear energy. I turned out to be wrong. I mean, just wrong. This is like, there is no debate the safety of nuclear energy over time. Granted, there is a risk, but even the worst things that have happened in nuclear energy have been trivial compared to the daily things that happen associated with coal or natural gas building explosions that happen all the time, like that plant in Pennsylvania just last week. So anyway, I think fusion, I'm very interested in. It's all in the press. They're making progress. My prediction is it will not be a useful source of energy for anything in kind of normal life, maybe outer space or something. Then the other thing that I followed, because we work with these fusion scientists, we had over 100. We funded over 100 fusion scientists total associated with this endeavor. I've gotten to know some of these people very well and have learned a lot about the math and the physics involved in their work, and that's all kind of close to quantum computing, and the of course that ties into Chat GPT and all its variants. So AI systems. It doesn't directly tie in, but it's kind of adjacent to it. Of course, quantum AI is going to be, that's the big threat or big risk. Just how we deal with complicated AI systems, and when people concede that in fact the machines are going to be able to think. For a long time people said, yeah, I know, but they'll never cross over that line of being able to like form an independent thought. I don't know what an independent thought is, frankly. And I think that the distinction is one that isn't going to make any difference. You're going to have computers making decisions based on something. And of course, no one's going to know what that is. No one knows how the algorithms work inside these AI systems. I'm telling you, the inventors.
How does character, behavior, integrity, responsibility, forgiveness, and compassion factor into the AI world? Do you have
how about
thoughts?
Responsibility? I mean, give me a break. And I mean, integrity, it's a bit of an odd definition of the word, but kind of knowing what you're doing, to create something that you don't know its attributes. Literally, you don't know its attributes because it's self-evolving over time. can there be integrity in doing that if you are unable to constrain it? And by the whole structure of the internet these days, you're not able to constrain it kind of the minute you release it. Anyway, it's such a dilemma. I am sympathetic to the fact that it's going to happen. Like, that genie is kind of out of the bottle. And if you're in a world where genies are being released from bottles, and they're being used to genetically modify babies in China. Just one second. Sorry about that. I lost my camera for a minute. If you have some AI system and it's being used to genetically modify babies in China, I'm mixing metaphors here. They did genetically modify babies in China. I'm not saying they use these AI systems to do that with, but that's what's going to start happening. And if you're seeing that happen in the world, and you can make an AI that was better, that had character built into it somehow, and people say, well, we're going to do that. It's like, yeah, we're going to do that later. We'll figure that out. But is there some way that you could build, integrity, responsibility, forgiveness, compassion, into an AI system? I don't know, but man, we got to do it, because those things are going to be running the show. I'm just telling you.
Yeah. So, Tom, it's been such an honor to be with you. I love hanging out with you because I always learn a ton, and you rub off on me all the time in the right direction. So I'm grateful.
Well,
and I really appreciate who you are. And thanks for coming on our show.
Thank you. It's an honor, and I really appreciate it. And I'm inspired by the work you're doing, and it affects what I do on a regular basis. So anyway, bless you.